What if the thing calling itself self-care is actually just criticism wearing softer clothes? What if that voice in your head is not helping you regulate, not helping you heal, not helping you get back on your feet? What if it's just moved from "you're too much" to "you should be handling this better by now"? And what if the reason self-care feels heavy isn't because you're lazy, inconsistent, or broken? What if it's because somewhere along the way, care got replaced with performance? Welcome to Wisdom from the Porch, the place where we slow things down, tell the truth, and make room for a more human way to live. I'm GP. This is Wisdom from the Porch. There's a version of self-care that sounds beautiful on paper. Drink more water, get more sleep, set boundaries, go outside, move your body, journal, breathe, rest, protect your peace. None of those things are wrong, but sometimes the language of care gets picked up by a mind that already knows how to weaponize expectations. So instead of hearing support, you hear accusation. You didn't drink enough water today. You should have gone to bed earlier. You're terrible at routines. You ruined the day. You said yes when you should have said no. You're dysregulated again. You know better than this. And now something that was supposed to help you feel safer starts making you feel watched. That's the shift I want to talk about, because a lot of people are not resisting self-care. They're resisting the shame that has attached itself to the word. For a neurodivergent mind especially, that distinction matters, because when your internal world already carries extra friction, with energy, transitions, focus, sensory load, emotional regulation, demand avoidance, task initiation, perfectionism, shutdown, recovery, anything framed as simple can start to feel insulting. Not because you don't want help, because you're tired of being handed formulas that ignore the actual terrain of your life. And once that happens, even good advice can land like blame. That's when self-care becomes one more arena where you feel behind. One more place where you think, apparently everyone else knows how to be a person except me. But that thought is not truth. That thought is what happens when care has been stripped of compassion. Because real care is not just instruction. It's context, it's gentleness, it's accuracy, and it's understanding what something costs you. It's knowing that two people can perform the exact same task and pay two completely different internal prices for it. One person answers 3 emails and moves on. Another person answers 3 emails and spends the next 2 hours trying to come down from the invisible stress of context switching, tone monitoring, decision fatigue, and low-grade fear of getting something wrong. Same task, different nervous system bill. That matters. And if your version of self-care does not account for your actual nervous system, it'll eventually start to feel fake, or worse, cruel. A lot of self-criticism enters through the back door of high standards. It sounds reasonable. It sounds mature. It sounds disciplined. But underneath it, there's often a constant refusal to let yourself be human while you're healing. You miss one habit, and suddenly your brain tells you the whole week is gone. You need extra rest, and your mind calls it laziness. You hit a limit, And instead of adjusting, you start interrogating your character. That's not self-improvement. That's self-surveillance. And self-surveillance is exhausting, especially when you've spent years trying to become acceptable to systems that were never built with your wiring in mind. That's why compassion has to become practical, not decorative, not performative, practical. Compassion is not pretending hard things are easy. Compassion is not lowering all expectations until nothing matters. Compassion is not saying, do whatever. Compassion says, tell the truth about what this actually takes. That's different, very different. Because once truth enters the room, your strategy can finally become honest. Maybe your problem is not that you lack discipline. Maybe your system is overloaded. Maybe your routine keeps failing because it requires you to function like a machine instead of a person. Maybe your self-care isn't failing because you don't care enough. Maybe it's failing because it was built around an imaginary version of you. The one who's always regulated, always clear-headed, always well-rested, always on time, always socially resourced, always ready. That version of you is not the one that needs care. The real one does. The one who gets overwhelmed, who forgets, who needs more recovery than they wish they did. The one who can do brilliant things and still feel wrecked by ordinary ones. The one who keeps trying. That person deserves care too. Actually, that person is the whole point. So what does compassionate self-care sound like? It sounds less like, why can't you keep it together? And more like, what would make this easier to carry? It sounds less like, you should be able to do this by now, and more like, what support is missing here? It sounds less like, everybody else can handle this, and more like, what does handling this honestly look like for me? It sounds less like punishment and more like partnership. That word matters. Partnership. Because many people have an inner voice that acts like management, not partnership. Always reviewing, always measuring, always scoring, always disappointed. And after a while, the soul gets tired of being managed. It starts hiding, starts resisting. It starts shutting down before the day even begins, not because you're incapable, but because nobody thrives under nonstop internal hostility. And that includes you. Sometimes the most radical form of self-care is refusing to escalate against yourself. Not making the bad hour become a bad day. Not making the bad day become a moral failure. Not turning one forgotten task into a whole courtroom case about your worth. That interruption matters because self-criticism loves speed. It rushes the verdict. Compassion slows the trial down. It asks better questions. What happened? What drained you? What did I need that I didn't have? What would support look like now? Not in theory, but now. That is not weakness. That is skilled care. Sometimes compassion means canceling something before your body chooses for you. Sometimes compassion means eating the easy meal instead of skipping food because you don't have the energy to make the ideal one. Sometimes compassion means realizing that a 5-minute reset is still a reset. Sometimes compassion means letting the plan be smaller so your shame does not get bigger. That counts. Small care counts. Adjusted care counts. Imperfect care counts. A lot of people have only been taught 2 modes: neglect or optimization. Either abandon yourself completely or turn yourself into a project. But there's another way. You can regulate yourself like someone worth understanding, not just fixing, understanding. Because when care begins with curiosity instead of condemnation, your nervous system has a chance to cooperate. And once there is cooperation, change becomes more possible. Not instant, not pretty, not linear, but possible. Compassion is not the opposite of growth. Compassion is often what makes growth sustainable. A harsh voice can produce short bursts of compliance, but it usually cannot produce safety. And people heal better in safety than in fear. So if self-care has started to feel heavy, somehow turns into another way to feel inadequate. If rest feels guilty, routines feel humiliating, and support feels like something you have to earn, then maybe the issue is not that you failed at self-care. Maybe self-care has been handed to you in a language your spirit no longer trusts. You don't need more pressure. You need a translation. One with more honesty, more room, more accuracy, more mercy, more nervous system respect, more humanity. Because care that humiliates you is not care. And criticism with a wellness label is still criticism. So let me leave you with this. If the voice calling itself self-care leaves you feeling smaller, tighter, guiltier, and more defeated, that may not be care at all. If it sounds like pressure with a calm tone, if it sounds like shame dressed up as discipline, if it sounds like disappointment hiding behind the word better, you're allowed to question it. You're allowed to choose a gentler voice. You're allowed to build a version of care that actually feels like support. If this episode met you where you are, share it with someone who's been carrying themselves a little too harshly. Follow, subscribe, and come back to the porch for more conversations that help you breathe, think, and live a little lighter. And as always, thank you to Cloud Microphones for supporting these conversations. This has been Wisdom from the Porch. I'm GP. You're always welcome on the porch.